My 24F husband 25 meters cheated on me and I don't know what to do. Me and my husband have been together for almost 4 years, we dated for a year, engaged for a year and married for almost 2 years. We've had issues in the past, having to do with his drinking, overindulgence. I would express my frustration every time he would get drunk, and he wouldn't see the big deal in it. He transitioned to only drinking on the weekends, but even then he would drink and was still an issue because he wouldn't know when to stop. And he's the kind of man to never bring up his own frustrations with me unless he's been drinking, so whenever he'd get drunk and I'd express my annoyance with him, it would turn into a huge argument about past things that he's held onto, about things that I do that upset him. We've never had issues with trust, and I honestly never thought that he would do this to me. At the end of summertime last year, we decided to move to a different state because the one we were living in we could not afford anymore. Before we moved, he talked about going to a different denomination of Christianity that we'd been going to. He grew up a Christian but not really going to church regularly until he met me. I grew up Pentecostal and have been going to church since I was a child. His family over the last 5 or so years have come to be Orthodox Christians, which he became very interested in. Before we moved, I told him I would try going to this church if this is something he wanted to try, but if I didn't like it I don't want to be forced to go to this church. He said he wouldn't force me into anything and that was that. So fast forward, we moved here and started going to that church. His drinking was still an issue, and even though I thought the church and everyone there was very kind, I just didn't feel right going there. I expressed that to him and he told me I should bring my concerns to the priest of the church. I haven't done that and I don't know if I will. Fast forward to a month-ish ago, it was a Friday night and I was at work. He works construction and I work in the service industry, so we have opposite schedules most of the time. He decided to go out to a bar with his brother and cousins and their friends. All of them are married, or have girlfriends, and like I said, there's been no breach of trust ever, so I had no reason not to trust him. I got home from work around 10 p.m. and he called me and said I should come out. I said I don't really feel like it and he said that's okay and he'd be home soon. 2 hours go by and he's still out. He called me multiple times, multiple being like 10 times, drunk and confused and lost and alone. So I told him to get an Uber back home. He said okay, but then I heard his brother on the other end say, "There you are." So I told him to stay with his brother and come home soon. 2 hours go by, it's 2 a.m. and all the bars close at this time. We share our locations with each other so I could see where he was. I texted him and told him to get home and I fell asleep by my phone. I get a call from his brother saying that they lost him and they couldn't find him and they had left him downtown alone. So I call him again, and I heard a woman on the other end laughing. He picks up and says, "Hello," and I said, "Who is that?" And he said, "Just a friend." I said, "Don't lie to me, who is that?" He said, "There's no one here." Listen, silence. He blatantly lies, so I said, "Get home now. If you're not home in 20 minutes I am locking you out." He says okay. I watch his location start to move like 10 minutes later. We live like 15 minutes from where he was and it took him an hour to get home. I watched his location go into different neighborhoods and turn around and he took the weirdest and longest way home. His location never stopped during those movements, so I don't even know if anything more than what I ended up seeing happened. So an hour goes by of my watching his location, and eventually gets to an intersection a minute from our house. Then his location stops moving, and his phone says it's at 0% life, 360 tells you their battery percentage. But he was a minute away from the house, so no big deal. 20 minutes go by, he's still not home. So I decided to get in my car and go drive to where his location was last updated. Drive around the gas stations, there was no parked cars, nothing. So I drive back home, check his location again and it shows me that it's back down the road that he already came down. So I got in my car again and started driving towards him. Until his location started to move towards me again. I drove home and watched the location until finally they pull in front of our house. I was watching from our window through the blinds, peeking through so he couldn't see me watching. It was dark out so I could only see their silhouettes, but I watched as he leaned over to the driver's side that looked like they were kissing. He leaned back over after probably a minute or so of them kissing. I watched him turn the dome light on in the car and I could see them, talking and smiling. He turns the light back off, and leaned back over and kissed her again. Another minute of making out ensues and I finally stormed downstairs, threw on my jacket and walked out there. I opened the passenger door of the car where he was and they were still making out. He turned and looked at me, drunk out of his mind and unrecognizable. I looked at him and told him to stay the F away from me, to not come inside, and we're done. I looked at the girl and said, "You can take him to wherever you're going." I stormed back inside and locked all the doors, went upstairs and locked myself in the spare room. It was 4 in the morning at this point. I'm trying to call my friends and nobody will answer. I looked out my window and saw him standing in the front, the car gone now. Finally one of my friends answers. I am bawling and I told her he cheated on me. Downstairs I could hear the door being broken in and I heard him come inside. The door was fine but he broke the trim of the door to get it open. I grabbed my purse, my coat and stayed on the phone with my friend. I went to walk out the door and he asked where I was going and I told him, "Away from you." He said, "No, stay, we're talking about this," and I said no. He tried to come near me and I told him to get away. I turned around and I asked him, "Why?" And his response was, "What do you do for me?" I laughed because I literally couldn't believe what he said. Then I walked out to my car and opened the door. I pressed the lock button when I opened it. He followed me and grabbed my door, not letting me close it. I said let go and he said get inside now, and we just kept repeating the same things, getting louder and louder. Eventually I shoved him hard enough where he stumbled back and let go of the door, giving me enough time to close it. He tried to open it. Realizing it was locked, he hit my window and stormed inside. I drove away still on the phone with my friend. Eventually my sister-in-law, who lives a couple hours from me, answered. My friend that answered originally lives in the state we moved from. She said to go to my brother-in-law's house because he the closest to me, only like 20 minutes. Long story short, sister-in-law and her husband, my husband's brother, drive up from where they live. They went to go check on my husband before coming to me. When they walked in our house, he was passed out on the floor of our living room. Then, without me having a say in it, they drove him to where I was staying. To make an already long story short, he basically said he feels alone and that I don't do enough for him. He feels like he does all the cooking and cleaning, etc., which I can admit that I could do better on that, but that's no excuse for what he did. And he feels alone emotionally because he doesn't share his true emotions with me unless he's been drinking. So how am I supposed to know he feels a certain way if he doesn't tell me out of fear of making me upset? Which we've had multiple conversations about this. I told him it doesn't matter if it makes me mad, he still needs to say something instead of letting it fester. Still nothing changes in the behavior. I packed a bag and stayed the night at his cousin's house because nothing came of the first conversation. He said he was done drinking completely. That first night I stayed at his cousin's, I drove over to our house to see if he kept the promise, and I walk in and there was an empty either 12 or 18 rack of beer, I can't remember which amount it was. I said, "You already broke my trust again," and I asked why he was drinking and he said, "Well, I didn't know you were coming home." I walked away laughing because I couldn't believe the excuse. I said that he should be begging on his knees for me not to leave him. I said how lucky he was to have me. I am the most loyal person you will ever meet. And I have had many men approach me wanting to ask me out, but I never thought for a second about doing anything like that because I am married. My friends bought me a ticket home the next day and I stayed there for a couple of days. I made the decision to stay and try to work on it because I love him so much. I told him he needs to quit drinking, which he has for almost a month now. No more nicotine. He needs to get on ADHD medication. He needs to get his license back. He got a DUI 2 weeks before split wedding, and we need to go to a different church. He also has surgery he needs to get done. He hasn't done any of these things for himself since we've been together. Which now he's taken some initiative and gotten appointments for most of these things. But since I've moved back in, I've been having to remind him just like before that he needs to get this stuff done. I feel like a mother to him sometimes. We have an appointment for marriage counseling next week. We had to fill out intake forms for it and I read his and he stated the only issues we have is trust because of his infidelity, even though we have a lot more issues than that. I am struggling with the thought of this happening again 10 years down the line, but then we have kids involved. I am struggling with the fact that he might come to resent me because he wants to go to that church, but I don't want to. He said he'll go to a different church because he wants to save our marriage, which sounds like a very likely possibility of resentment arising in the future. I am afraid that he will go right back to what he was doing before and making me nag him over and over about certain things. I know this is long and I don't know how subreddits work, so this could get taken down. I just don't know what to do anymore. I would love honest advice. I can answer any questions because I couldn't very well fit all our relationship fights or conversations in one post. Edit something important I should have definitely included that he did apologize multiple times. Not the night it happened, but when his family brought him over to see me he did apologize. He's the one that brought up counseling, if that makes any difference.